Welcome to the Weather Shed. I'm your chief prognosticator, weather interpreter, and most importantly for this video, veteran storm chaser of over 20 years and lifelong Iowan Clarence Smith. And this is the first time on this channel we've actually had severe weather to talk about. What we're looking at right off the bat here is the Storm Prediction Center's convective outlook for this coming Thursday. Oh, before I forget, today is Tuesday, September 17th. We have the potential for severe weather through at least the middle portion of the state. That yellow area is the slight risk, and then darker green here is a marginal outlook. Now, this far out, 3 days, the Storm Prediction Center isn't giving a whole lot of details, but one thing that I am looking at is this word, isolated activity. Back when I was younger and I'd watch the weather on the 8s on the Weather Channel, the two most exciting words for me were isolated T-storms. And I'll explain here in coming slides why that is. So let's go ahead and look at the NAM 3K 3-kilometer model. Again, this is a model. This is the future radar that is being predicted, at least today, Tuesday. And this will obviously change as we get closer. So everything I say from this point onward, know it's subject to change, as is with pretty much anything to do with the weather. But just for funsies, we're going to take a look and see right now what at least this model is predicting could happen. So right off the bat, your Thursday morning, parts of southwest up to north central Iowa, you may be looking at a little bit of a wet commute depending on where you're at. Maybe some thunder and lightning. Not expecting anything severe at this point. Now, as we go ahead into the future, this is at noon. You can see those storms have moved east. They've kind of broken up. But they've probably left a little bit of moisture, and they could maybe leave behind something called a boundary. And that's basically if you think of a pond or lake or something like that, and you have something impact the surface and it leaves a bit of a ripple effect behind that object. That's sort of a loose analogy for what a boundary layer is. And that will be potentially important as we look later on here on Thursday. So between 4 and 5 p.m., we're looking at storms developing out in western Iowa along a cold front. And again, as I've mentioned, in theory, we may have something like a boundary left behind for these storms to move into and interact with. Now, advance a little further, and you can see we start to have a bit more maturity with these storms around 6 p.m. Now, as a storm chaser, this is where the time and place on Thursday that I'm looking at. So an emphasis for me would probably be around the Fort Dodge area, perhaps trailing further down in the cold front. We have a term for the very southern storm called a tail end Charley, which can sometimes be in the better environment for producing a tornado. Now, as with any internet weather channel, when you start talking about severe weather and tornadoes, the common phrase is don't be scared, be prepared. I don't know if Ryan Hall coined that, but it's good advice. I don't mean to get anyone worked up or in a frenzy. This isn't looking like a tornado outbreak or anything major at this point, but something to be aware of, especially this time of year when a lot of people aren't expecting it. But we are in the second season, and this stuff does happen. So, moving ahead, these storms, they'll grow, mature, perhaps start to line out. But as a storm chaser, one thing I'm seeing that's still a bit encouraging, even at 8 p.m. after sunset, which is going to be about, depending on where you are in the state, between 7:10 and 7:30 on Thursday. Here in Des Moines, I think it's going to be right around 7:20. So it's going to be well into darkness at this point, but we still have some degree of separation with these cells, and that lends itself again to perhaps a little bit greater tornado potential. Now, there is a fair amount of energy with these storms, but as the Storm Prediction Center discussion was talking about, they're not expecting them to live much further past sunset. And this model tends to agree. They start to break up. In fact, here in South Central Iowa, they're almost gone. These, just based on the sloppiness of this radar signature, look kind of messy. And, besides some small hail, I wouldn't expect anything past probably 8 p.m., maybe 9 p.m. On Thursday. So still bring some beneficial rain and, be weather aware, of course. Now, let's look at a little bit more advanced stuff that you're not going to get on your local TV station. We're looking at a plot of hodographs, and a hodograph tells us a few things, but what we look at for tornado-producing storms is, we'll just take this one as an example because it's the best looking one on the map. Each of these color segments, each color changes with height. So we start closest to the ground, work our way up, we get into more of the mid-level part of the storm, and then the anvil, those long wispy white clouds that you see out ahead of a storm. And they almost, these hodographs can predict almost how the storms look, just the shape and the direction that they're pointing. It's really actually very neat. But for tornadoes, a lot of times we're primarily interested in this lowest level, this 0 to 1 kilometer level. And we want kind of what we call a sickle shape, which this one has. It's very rounded, and it makes for a more efficient rotation. We'll just simplify it that way. And when this mid-level gets involved too, and this whole thing just kind of looks like a half circle, then you have what we call very good streamwise vorticity, and that can be a good precursor for tornado potential. Now, if you look over, say here in Wisconsin, like that one's like straight up, and then it goes straight over, and just, it's not rounded like this one. This one's even not that great as we get around Ames and then back down to Des Moines. So really, if as a storm chaser, looking at the way things are currently in this model, my area of interest around 6 p.m., if we think back to where those cells were showing on the reflectivity, would be right in this area, which is actually very good chase terrain, very good road network. So again, a lot of you aren't watching as storm chasers. I do apologize, but it's something that I get excited about and really like to analyze. So hopefully you learned something and gained some beneficial information out of this. Now, one map that a lot of storm chasers don't really mention, but I like to look at, is this crossover plot. And what that does is basically show you wind direction and speed with height. Not too dissimilar from the hodograph that we just looked at, but I see this as a very simplified look at favorable wind profiles. And I'll just kind of draw on the map here. What I like to see is a little bit of a southeast direction at the surface, which would be these red barbs. And then roughly maybe less than 45-degree angle on the next barb, which is blue, and that's at 850 millibars. And not to be too technical, and it varies depending on atmospheric conditions, but we'll just say that's roughly a kilometer up in the atmosphere. We'd call that for storms mid-level. Then we have an upper level wind, which is your 500 millibar, which is represented by black. And again, roughly 45-degree angle from the last barb. So you get, kind of like I mentioned in the hodograph, a nice round, efficient wind profile. So if we're looking at the map here, areas once again that I like based on this is right in here, right along I-35. That would be, as far as the wind profile, is my ideal chase condition. And this shaded color area is essentially how much energy is available for these storms to work with. And for this time of year in September, this is actually quite a bit. We're looking at basically out ahead of the storms, still in central Iowa, about 2,000 joules per kilogram. Where these storms are actually firing are 3,500 to 4,000. which I'd be impressed if we actually do see those numbers. And I'll show you in an upcoming map why that may actually come true. In case you're wondering, these white spots are actually the result of storms that have fired and used up that energy. So that CAPE, as it is referred to, convective available potential energy. If I got that right. So, as I mentioned, where are we getting that energy from? And we have a lot of moisture to work with. We're going to have dew points at 6 p.m. This may be a little high. I don't know if they'll actually reach this much, but in the lower 70s, that is tropical. That's a lot of moisture, a lot of fuel for these storms. Now, one detriment is having that much fuel means they may form up to a line and reduce perhaps the tornado risk. Still perhaps, though, straight line gusty winds. When we look for tornado potential, we want that low level moisture for that funnel to condense and create the tornado. So it can be both a good thing for producing tornadoes and a bad thing. Once again, I want to reiterate, I'm speaking as a storm chaser. I don't want tornadoes to hurt or impact anyone. This is definitely, I would give up storm chasing in a heartbeat if it meant that ever happening again. So just want to preface that. So in addition to the storms, we're looking at some rainfall, depending on your profession, beneficial or not. This is the, if you want a fancy term, quantified precipitation forecast total based on the same model we were looking at for those radar images. And you can see with those thunderstorms, it's saying, you know, we could pick up maybe a couple inches in spots. This yellow area, I believe, represents, 4 inches. Maybe. Very isolated. Wouldn't plan on it. But the Weather Prediction Center, however, is looking at a general 1/3 to a 1/2 inch of rain for the northern part of the state, much less as you get further south. So, all this said, we are still 3 days out, and this all has to be taken with a grain of salt. Everything is subject to change, but there is, if you look at the tea leaves, some potential for severe weather and maybe even tornadoes on Thursday. And if I were a betting man, when we see our day 2 outlook tomorrow, I bet this slight risk gets extended down, maybe even back southwest a little bit. And it's on the day 2 storm prediction forecast that we actually start to see broken down by category, wind, hail, tornadoes, what they're thinking the probabilities are. So we'll have more to talk about in a future video. And as we get closer, we start to get more models come into range that we can analyze, some that I believe are more accurate. And so expect coming video Wednesday, or perhaps maybe I'll do a morning video on Thursday. So as always, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you found any value, interest, entertainment. Not so much on this video. Appreciate any comments, likes, and sharing this with your friends. So, enjoy your Tuesday evening. Should be another nice warm day tomorrow on Wednesday. And we'll see you on the next video.